We now start to look at project risk management. Before we do that, let's look at the context, at why this topic is important. Previously, we looked at how investors and lenders assess an investment. We saw that they apply financial analysis to decide whether to invest in something or not. And they focus on the cash flows generated by an investment and analyze the returns that they can expect from it. Then we applied that to the funding of projects. We saw that a specialty area of project finance is developed, and we saw that in project finance, we contain the financing purely to the project by means of a special purpose vehicle, or an SPV. That legally ring fences the cash flows of the project. The consequence of this is that we look purely at the project cash flows. They need to be predictable and transparent. If the project cash flows are not predictable and transparent, for example, due to the occurrence of substantial project risks, investors will not be able to determine their expected return, and then they will not want to invest and the project finance will fail. Even if the project cash flows are clear and transparent, they may still be unstable, for example, due to the occurrence of substantial project risks. And then the investors will want to see a higher return on their investment to compensate them for taking the higher investment risks. If the funding costs are too high due to these project risks, the project returns may be insufficient to service the required funding cost. For example, if a project can realistically only generate a return of 8%, but investors want a return of 10%, then the project financing will also fail. This interplay between the risk and the expected investment return demonstrates that it is crucial in project management to do everything you can to analyze the risks and to stabilize the cash flows. We do that through risk management, that is, anticipating risks and putting in place mitigating measures whenever it's possible. Because this is such an important topic, project finance has developed a rigorous, standardized and thorough process for this. With years of experience that went into its development, following this risk management process will greatly improve the likelihood of a successful financing. So when do we do this risk management? First, let's look at the project phases. The legal start of a project is usually the so-called closing. It is a session where all the project contracts are signed and the rights and responsibility of all the project participants are frozen. After the closing, the construction can begin. The closing is when the project development phase ends and the project construction phase begins. Then completion or commissioning is when the construction phase ends and the project assets start operation, the operating phase. Risks can occur at different moments and in all these phases. Risk management is therefore a dynamic process that takes place in all these project phases. That means that the risk management needs to be repeated from time to time. Risks and possible risk mitigations will change as the project progresses. For example, many of the construction risks will have fallen away once the construction is completed, and new insights and technical developments can be taken on board when they occur. It's important to begin the risk management process very early on, particularly in the project development phase, and there are 3 reasons for this. 1. When you approach an investor or a lender, they will ask you pertinent questions about the impact of project risks on the expected cash flows. If you don't have acceptable answers, they will lose interest and they may walk away. We need to keep in mind that investors, and particularly lending banks, are not risk tolerant. They have a limited knowledge of your project and they cannot easily invent possible risk mitigating opportunities themselves. That's not their job. If you've done your homework, prepared a risk management and mitigation plan, that will pay off in success. Furthermore, their lack of knowledge also makes the investor or lender more skeptical towards your project. The second reason for doing this: at the time of closing, the project funding rates are locked in, often for many years. All the work you've done to reduce the risk at that time will help to reduce those funding rates. And with a 20-year financing, that homework will pay off over 20 years. Thirdly, and finally, if you fail in the project financing, all the project development costs will be lost forever. We call that sunk costs. And in a large and complex project, the development costs can be millions of dollars. Even more reason to focus carefully on the risk management early on and to identify potential deal killers as soon as possible. Project finance is essentially a refined risk distribution system. All the risks that are retained by the project company, the SPV, will increase the funding cost or may make the project financing fail. We saw that just now. So we go to great lengths to allocate the risks to other project parties. We try to allocate the risk away from the SPV to the party that is best able to assess and manage a particular risk. Let me give you some examples. If a construction risk, that's often a building firm that would be able to absorb that risk better than a financial institution. A financial institution would not be keen to assume a construction risk. But for a currency risk, on the other hand, the conversion differences between the euros and the dollars, for example, in an ever-exchanging market, a financial institution will be better placed to assess and assume this for a price, because currencies are part of the core business of a bank. And the sales risk, being able to sell the project product or service, often the intended buyer will know best how to manage that. If, for example, the project company built a power plant, the risk of selling the electricity is best assessed by a power utility company. We can try to allocate that risk to that utility through a so-called power purchase agreement, or PPA. We'll see later that this is exactly what happens in such situations. The party who is best able to assess and manage a particular risk is also most likely to give you the best price for assuming that risk, because all risk transfers will cost the SPV money. If we cannot find a contract party who is willing to assume a certain risk, we can try to insure that with an insurance company. This could, for example, be the case with a risk of an earthquake occurring. If insuring risks turns out not to be possible, then the SPV will be left with the risk. And we can only hope that such a residual risk does not block the project financing. If it does, the project may not be independently financeable, unless we can get financial support, for example, from a government or an international aid agency.